There can be no higher risk moment in a leader's diary these days. You arrive at the White House and the mass media then record your every facial move and gulp as you listen to President Trump riff uncontrollably on issues that shake the world. Keir Starmer immediately tried to warm up the president with an invitation designed to get on his good side.
It is my pleasure to bring from His Majesty the King a letter. He sends his best wishes and his regards, of course, but he also asked me to bear this letter and bring it to you. So can I present the letter from the King to you?
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to read it right now?
Yeah, please do.
I will do.
I've got to tell him what your reaction is, so I need to know. I need to know.
He is a great gentleman, a great, great gentleman. Perhaps you'd like to say what that very important paragraph is?
Yes, so this is a letter from His Majesty the King. It's an invitation for a second state visit. This is really special. This has never happened before. This is unprecedented. And I think that just symbolises the strength of the relationship between us. So this is a very special letter. I think the last state visit was a tremendous success.
It was.
His Majesty the King wants to make this even better than that. So this is truly historic, an unprecedented second state visit, and he wants to talk that through with you.
And that says at Windsor. That's
Yes.
really something.
Yes. What I haven't got yet is your answer. I do need to.
The answer is yes. On behalf of
Keir Starmer came here with the number one priority of getting clarity and firmness from President Trump on Ukraine. If British and French forces tried to patrol the buffer zone between Ukraine and Russian-occupied Ukraine, could they summon America's military might in support if Russia attacked Ukraine again?
But we are a backstop because we'll be over there. We'll be working in the country. We're going to be, that's a great thing economically for them because, you know, when you talk about economic development, we're going to have a lot of people over there. So we'll be working in the country. So I just don't think you're going to have a problem. I think when we have an agreement, you can say whatever you want about security, who's going to do it or on, and that's going to be a very pleasant conversation. The hard conversation is, will we have an agreement? And I think the answer is yes. I think Russia will agree, and I think that I really believe Ukraine will agree also.
Coming 3 days after President Macron was seen to correct President Trump misrepresenting European cash contributions to Ukraine, Keir Starmer did his own, more discreet, low-key correction.
Money, we don't get the money back. Biden made a deal. He put in $350 billion. And I thought it was a very unfair situation.
We're not getting all of ours. I mean, quite a bit of ours was gifted. It was given. There were some loans, but mainly it was gifted, actually.
Mr. President,
It sounds as though one of you completely trusts President Putin and one of you doesn't trust him an inch. Have I got that right? And why should you trust
No,
him?
look, you know, it's trust and verify. Let's call it that. And I think we both can be that way. You have to verify because you never know what's going to happen. I know a lot of people that you would say no chance that they would ever deceive you, and they're the worst people in the world. I know others that you would guarantee they would deceive you, and you know what? They're 100% honorable, so you never know what you're getting. No, I have confidence that if we make a deal, it's going to hold.
if British troops are in Ukraine keeping the peace and get attacked by Russia, will you come to their aid?
If the British people are in
If
Ukraine
British
and they get
soldiers
attacked.
if British soldiers are in Ukraine,
You know, I've always found about the British, they don't need much help. They can take care of themselves very well.
that sounds like a
You know what? No, it sounds like it's evasive, but it's not evasive. You know, the British have been incredible soldiers, incredible military, and they can take care of themselves. But if they need help, I'll always be with the British, okay? I will always be with them. But they don't need help. You look at their career, you have done very well over the years, haven't you?
We have. I'm very proud of our country. And but we've also always been there backing each other up between our two countries. That is why this is the greatest alliance for prosperity and security I think the world has ever seen. Whenever necessary, we absolutely backed each other up, and that's at the
Could you
core of
take
the
on Russia by yourselves?
Well,
There was no dispute on the British deal to pay Mauritius to secure a long-term lease on Diego Garcia. No cross words. But there were huge gaps in what the two sides think is needed to make peace work in Ukraine.
Gary Gibbon inside the Oval Office. Well, ahead of those discussions, the US was forging ahead with talks with Russian diplomats in Turkey. And Russia is pushing ahead with the war in Ukraine and its battle to take back parts of its own Kursk region. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilsum, joins me now live. Lindsay, tell us more.
Matt, as we're watching those pictures of the Prime Minister and the President, you think, how many times before have we seen a British Prime Minister and an American President? And it's almost possible to forget the extraordinary geopolitical moment that we're at. Tomorrow, as you were saying earlier, President Zelenskyy is coming here. Now, he's in Kyiv today. He's been meeting the Irish Prime Minister, trying to shore up as much European support as he can before he comes here to sign the deal about minerals. But
will he sign it?
I think he will probably have to sign something.
Right.
But his aim is basically to try and pull President Trump back from this new friendship with Vladimir Putin. And think about it. What an extraordinary turnaround. Who are Vladimir Putin's best friends? Well, now they seem to be North
Korea, Belarus. All the people who voted with him
exactly.
in the UN the other day.
And that is what we have. We have President Trump on the same side as North Korea. Everybody was kung fu fighting, but it's a fight to the death. About 4,000 of the 12,000 North Korean troops sent to boost Russia's war against Ukraine are reported to have been killed. Now another 3,000 or so are on their way. This week, the larger-than-life North Korean leader watched their prowess on the range. He's sent weaponry as well as soldiers to Russia in exchange for advanced technology and budget support. Today in Moscow, President Putin was meeting a North Korean delegation. On Tuesday, the US voted with them and against Ukraine in a UN vote. According to the Russian leader, it's only pesky Europeans like Sir Keir Starmer who are getting in the way of his friendship with President Trump.
Понимаем, что не всех устраивает возобновление российско-американских контактов.
We understand that not everyone is satisfied with the resumption of Russian-U.S. contacts. Some Western elites are still determined to maintain instability in the world, and these forces will try to disrupt or compromise the dialogue that has begun.
This morning, a Russian delegation drove to the U.S. consulate in Istanbul for further talks about improving diplomatic ties.
Первые контакты с новой американской администрацией вселяют определенную.
The first contacts with the new U.S. administration encourage hope. There's a mutual readiness to work to restore relations and gradually solve huge systemic strategic problems in the global architecture. It was these problems that provoked both the Ukrainian and other regional crises.
Just a few meters from the Kremlin, the British ambassador was amongst other European diplomats laying flowers at the place where the Russian opposition politician Boris Nemtsov was assassinated 10 years ago today. He was shot after Russia annexed Crimea and after he said, "This war belongs to Putin. It's a cynical, deceitful, bloody, fratricidal war against our brothers in Ukraine." Not a view, it seems, shared by the current American president.
Well, one thing that Sir Keir Starmer and President Trump have in common is that they are both cutting their aid budgets, their foreign aid budgets, albeit, it has to be said, at very different levels. And as they began their talks today, termination notices were going out to US-funded international aid projects around the world, including those providing life-saving care. Let's talk more now about this with our health and social care editor, Victoria MacDonald, who is in Johannesburg. Victoria.
Yes, Matt, 5,800 of these letters have started to go out, the first of them arriving in South Africa and other African countries this morning as people got to their desk, and they were brutal. This programme, they were told, is being terminated for the sake of the US government. Now, somebody said to me it felt like they were AI generated. They weren't entirely clear. They left some questions to be answered, but quite frankly, the aid agencies I've talked to here are devastated. Already there was a 90-day freeze, but there was always that glimmer of hope that PEPFAR, the HIV and AIDS funding from America, would be reinstated at some level, but it appears maybe it won't happen. Today, earlier I sat down and spoke to UN AIDS, the HIV and AIDS organization, who receive a lot of funding from the US government.
They've made a significant contribution to the AIDS response country by country. And it really is a difficult time for everyone who is involved in this response, having to rethink it. And we really are concerned for those who are living with HIV, who are at risk, those who are most vulnerable, those girls and young women in our region who are being infected every single day.
Now, there was a press conference earlier with GPs, with doctors, scientists and advocacy groups who said that they feared this would set back AIDS. They estimated that there could be 6 million deaths worldwide within the next 4 years. They are calling on governments themselves to step up and to start bringing in the funding that is needed themselves. And they'd already started that discussion, but they said the short, sharp shock of this meant that they're not really prepared right now, and that means a lot of programs will fall by the wayside.
As we're still waiting for that press conference with Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, the president. Edward Lucas is a senior fellow at the Centre for European Policy Analysis and a former editor at The Economist who specialises in European and transatlantic security and in Russia. I spoke to him as Keir Starmer and Donald Trump were meeting in the Oval Office, and I began by asking if a second state visit is really the best card that Britain can play with Donald Trump.
I think one has to approach these meetings with a mixture of theatre studies and toddler psychology, and the opportunity of a really nice trip to Royal Palace is the sort of thing that will get Donald Trump's attention. Whether it actually delivers the American security guarantees that we all need to make any ceasefire in Ukraine credible is another matter.
And of course the Russians, as far as we know, have said very clearly no European troops on Ukrainian soil, whether you call them peacekeepers or tripwires or whatever else. We just don't want them there. And I wonder whether President Trump and Keir Starmer or President Macron have the willpower to resist the Russians on that particular red line.
Well, you're right, Matt. That's a huge question. I'm just imagine if we put a tripwire force in round Odessa, for example, that super important Ukrainian port where all the grain comes out from. Are we really willing to go to war with Russia to protect Ukrainian grain shipments? And if we're not, we're saying to Vladimir Putin, come back, help yourself, second, third helpings, cripple Ukraine, send millions of refugees to Europe, humiliate us. Or are we willing to stare him down and say, yes, we're willing to fight for that? I think the real point here is if we weren't willing to fight for Ukraine when they had a chance of winning, why are we willing to fight for Ukraine when we've made them lose? And that is a question that no Western leader really has an answer to.
And we know what Vladimir Putin thinks of the EU, who wants to see it, divided, possibly disappear. But when you hear President Trump saying, as he did this week, that the EU was set up to, quote, screw the United States, it doesn't exactly fill you with confidence that he's going to be better on our behalf. I mean, Britain's behalf and Europe's behalf.
You're absolutely right, Matt. And the way in which Marco Rubio snubbed Kaja Kallas, the EU's effectively foreign minister, is absolutely stunning. And the Europeans, whether they're in the EU or just next to it like we are, we're kind of in the firing line. We're in the vice. The Russians are out to get us from one direction. It looks like the Americans are out to the other. And it's not just the sort of diplomatic and military problems. There's also the feeling that there's a kind of MAGA international, that the people around Trump, and perhaps Trump himself, really support the far right in in Germany, the far right in Romania getting the Tate brothers out of prison in Romania, out of detention, supporting Nigel Farage here in Britain. So there's a kind of ideological attack coming, which is almost reminiscent of the communist ideological attack during the Cold War, except it's coming from not just from the Kremlin, but coming from Washington, D.C. as well.
There's a kind of diplomatic and political muscle memory in any British government about the so-called special relationship. I mean, is it time to actually call it quits and just say it's never been that special in recent years? This is a dangerous route down which we go because it raises expectations. And the combined forces of geography and capriciousness out of the White House pushes Britain, whether it likes it or not, closer to the EU.
Well, the special relationship is a kind of cringeworthy phrase which covers a couple of very important realities. There's very close intelligence cooperation and very close cooperation over nuclear weapons. We rent our Trident missiles from the United States, the thing that still gives Britain its claim to be a sort of global power. Our nuclear deterrent fundamentally depends on American consent. So, and this is why this meeting between Starmer and Trump is so difficult. If Trump wants to, he can yank the rug under Starmer and say, I'm cancelling the nuclear agreement, so goodbye to your nuclear deterrent. He can do all sorts of other things as well, but that is it's a particular problem for Britain. We're joined at the hip with the Americans on these very important things, and if they walk away, we're left sprawling on the ground.
Edward Lucas, thank you very much indeed. Well, earlier I spoke to Nina Khrushcheva, Professor of International Affairs at the New School in New York, and of course the granddaughter of the former Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. I asked her if the mineral deal in Ukraine would really offer some kind of security guarantee for the Ukrainians, as suggested by President Trump.
We've been seeing in the 3 years in the war with Ukraine that despite all the announced red lines by Vladimir Putin, he really is very reluctant. He really doesn't want to fight with NATO. He doesn't want to fight with larger Europe. He doesn't want to fight with the United States. So in this sense, I mean, and Trump is braggadocious. Trump really says that as long as I appear, or the minute I appear, I mean, the whole world is going to be all in order and wonderful. Certainly, I wouldn't imagine Russians risking a larger war. So they are going to attack American workers or American engineers. In fact, if Putin does want good relationship with Trump, and potentially he can get some, is that it's the Russians who are there should be very, very careful not to touch anything that doesn't belong to the Russian side.
But let's say there was a deal done and Putin respects those red lines and the current front line becomes the ceasefire line. What are the guarantees that he won't try again in a couple of years' time, which is something the Ukrainians are very worried about?
No, I don't think that anybody could give a guarantee. I mean, and Putin would say, what do you want guarantees from me for? Because you guaranteed that NATO is not going to expand in the 1990s, that NATO is not going to expand any further east, and look at you. But there must be some absolutely very serious guarantees on the Western side, on the American side, that Russia does know if something happens, then there's something is being shot right on the Red Square.
So the Europeans are still talking, some of them, about sending these troops. The Russians have said absolutely no troops. Are both the Russians and the Europeans in parallel universes?
Right. Well, they've been in parallel universes a long time. So, and I understand why Europe argues that they needs the troops. But I think what's important is that if you're sending the troops, you're willing to take all the consequences that come with it. Are you ready? So once they decide they should do it, I think Russians would absolutely not want it. But if there is a right offer comes along from Trump, Putin may agree to that.
The Prime Minister on Tuesday, I think it was, said the reason why Britain has to increase its defense spending is ultimately because we cannot be certain that Vladimir Putin will stop in Ukraine. Do you think that Vladimir Putin actually wants to go beyond Ukraine?
In my view, this is pure European and British propaganda. And I've been saying it for a long time, because what we're seeing, if we analyze honestly, Putin doesn't want to go there. His beef was with Ukraine, and then it became the beef with the whole West, that West doesn't recognize him. This is not approving of him in any way. This is not excusing him, but this is just to say that the Europeans who promised all this help, who said that Putin is going to be defeated in 5 seconds or less, it hasn't happened. So they actually need to justify their own actions. I think much more important is not that Putin is coming to Britain. Please, unless you really ask him too much, that please come and attack Britain. The question is not whether he's coming to Britain, but that if the United States is unpredictable. So everybody needs to have their own defense in case something does happen.
Nina Khrushcheva, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
We are, of course, still waiting for that news conference between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, which is running a little bit late, sadly. But I just want to talk to our key correspondents here, editors, about what this means. Gary, you first, outside the White House. What's your biggest takeaway so far, without, of course, knowing what's going to be said in the press conference?
Enormous difference in tone you picked up there in that opening mini press conference between what President Trump was saying about the easiness of dealing with Ukraine and Russia and what Keir Starmer was saying only a couple of days ago when he talked about a generational moment. I think there's a feeling amongst British officials that there is no real American plan for what to do with Ukraine. They're very distressed about that, trying to nail it down now. And there are very serious implications. If you commit British forces without a proper plan, well, we were meant to have learnt a lot from the 2003 invasion of Iraq. And I think there might be a sense that there's some institutional memory lost if Britain was to do anything so bold as to start putting forces into a border protection force between Ukraine and Russian-occupied Ukraine without reflecting on all of that.
Lindsay, I mean, the stakes are big, of course, for Keir Starmer. They were big for Macron, who was here on Monday. They are existential for the man who's going to show up here tomorrow, President Zelenskyy.
Absolutely. And today it was very interesting. President Trump was asked, do you still think President Zelenskyy is a dictator? Which he said last week. He said, did I say that? Well, I'm pretty sure that President Zelenskyy will not forget that he said that. But you sometimes get the sense of President Trump that what matters is who he last spoke to, because he's mercurial. He changes according to who's been saying what in his ear. And one of the things which I think will also worry the Ukrainians is he keeps saying, oh, yes, we're very advanced on this peace deal. Now, that was what Gary was just saying. The British are very concerned about this because they know that there is no real plan. And also, I've spoken to people who have negotiated with the Russians before. The Russians have extraordinarily experienced people, and they pick every single line in every deal and they go through it. Sometimes they have a whole delegation for just one line or one paragraph. And if the Americans think that they can just breeze in and make a deal and get the better of the Russians, well, I think that President Zelenskyy knows that it's not going to be that simple.
And given the emotions, given the passion, given what's been happening on the battlefield in Ukraine for 3 years, this sort of unbearable lightness of being from the Americans is just disgraceful, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And last time I was in Ukraine, which was in December, people were desperate for peace, particularly soldiers on the front line. They were like, yes, we want a ceasefire, we want peace. But also the question is, what did our comrades die for? Did they die for nothing? Did they die for our territory to be given to Russia? Did they die for our government to become a wholly owned subsidiary of Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin? No, they didn't die for that. And so what Ukrainians are saying at the moment is, even if Russia and America do a deal and it doesn't work for Ukraine, they will carry on fighting.
Lindsay Hilsum, Gary Gibbon outside the White House, thank you very much indeed.